The world is a global village. It originally describes the phenomenon of the entire world becoming more interconnected as the result of a propagation of media technologies throughout the world. The keyword is technology. With the advancement of technology, countries around the world have become more reliant with each other on the hardware and software to carry out daily tasks. Over the years, it is apparent that the US focuses on developing the next generation cutting-edge technological designs and development, while Asia has taken up the role to produce sophisticated hardware to support planet Earth to be a high-tech planet. Well, things are about to change. Hi, I'm Frankie. Welcome back to my Fuck Show. We all know that resources are scarce. Therefore, with globalization, the world found a way to research, design, develop, and produce goods in an efficient way. For example, Silicon Valley serves as a global center for high technology and innovation. But labor is expensive in the US. As a result, the role of manufacturing was delegated to a region that is most cost efficient in manufacturing, China and other parts of Asia. In the 1990s, the US commanded 37% of the modern semiconductor manufacturing capacity. Fast forward to today, the US is left with 12% of such capacity, while Asia has over 80% of the current global wafer fabrication capacity. Although the numbers look bad for the US, this shift created much greater utilization of resources, benefiting the world with high technological gadgets at a relatively more affordable price. Here is how the chip supply chain works. A chip might be designed in the US by a fabless chip design firm like, say, Qualcomm or Broadcom. Then, to make chips, you need equipment that is manufactured by Lam Research or Applied Material Inc. in the US, ASML in Europe, or Tokyo Electron in Japan. In this process, a raw material known as silicon is fed into equipment made by those companies to be processed and sliced into wafers. Then, imprinted the pattern in Taiwan. After that, these wafers could be sliced and packaged into chips in Malaysia before being sent out to manufacturing facilities around Asia to be made into end products such as a smartphone, laptop, tablet, and any other gadgets that you can imagine. Things were doing just fine until 2018. The US began setting tariffs and other trade barriers on China with the goal of forcing it to make changes to what the US says are unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. On top of that, the US was alleging China had manipulated their currency, which made US companies almost impossible to compete with Chinese companies. In response to the US trade measures, the Chinese government accused the US of engaging in nationalist protectionism and took retaliatory action. Simply put, there's a crack in the world order of globalization. The two largest economic superpowers started battling with each other as they raced to be the biggest economy on the planet. This was the trade war between the US and China. The tech business is undoubtedly one of the most important sectors for the US economy. If we were to combine the top tech stocks such as Microsoft, Apple, Meta, Alphabet, and Amazon's market cap, these 5 companies alone are collectively worth more than $7 trillion. That's about 18 times of the size of Malaysian economy. Apart from its size, the drop in semiconductor manufacturing capacity since the 90s, together with the current chip shortage, has prompted the US leaders to treat semiconductors as an essential element of national security, especially in the context of tense US-China relations. Because of that, President Biden said that he was going to create rules to allow the US to pay a little more for the chips if they are made in America. And on 27th of July 2022, the US finally passed the CHIPS Act, short for the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors Act, which will pave the way for the government subsidies for the production of high-end semiconductors. It would set aside $52 billion in subsidies and also include about $100 billion in authorizations over 5 years for things like expanding the US National Science Foundation's work and establishing regional technological hubs to support startups in areas of the US that have not traditionally finally drawn big fundings for tech. With the CHIPS Act in place, it is time for the US to solidify its position in the tech sector. According to the US Semiconductor Industry Association, it is estimated that the US needs to add about 5.5% of the current global production of chips in order to just meet the most critical semiconductor applications. This would mean adding about 18 to 20 new wafer fabrication plants in the country. On the bigger scheme of things, if the US plans to be self-efficient in semiconductors, it needs to add almost 20% of the global chip productions. Having said that, it is widely debated that the $52 billion subsidies from the CHIPS Act would be enough to fund just a handful of new fabs in the US. That's clearly not enough to fulfill the American dream.
American dream. Best country in the world.
And come to think of it, is it really necessary to plow such an amount of money to be self-sufficient for chips? I mean, if the US is craving for milk, it doesn't need to buy a cow, right? It is true that most of the manufacturing capacity is now dominated by Asian countries, including Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. If there's any similarities among them, they are all US allies. They share not just democratic values, but also geopolitical interests with the United States. Take TSMC for example, the world's largest chip maker. Despite being a Taiwanese company and has business dealings with China, it has suspended chip shipments to Chinese companies like Huawei Technologies. That's a bold move, okay? TSMC is caught in the middle of a tug of war between the US and China, and yet it has sided with the US. Based on what we know today, the US and its allies contributes 92% of the total value of the global semiconductor supply chain, almost conquering the entire tech sector. Even if the argument is a potential Chinese threat to US national security, China tech is lagging by at least 2 generations. A well-known Chinese fab, SMIC, can only produce 45 nanometer chips, compared to TSMC, which is capable of producing 3 nanometer chips. Although China endeavors to catch up, the United States and its allies will enjoy a competitive advantage for many years to come. So, why the rush?
I don't know.
Well, maybe one possible security scenario leading to supply insecurity is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which would disrupt the US-centered supply chain. Or maybe this is just another US political will to create more jobs in the country, even though it may not be the most efficient way of doing things on a global scale. Unless the world is ready to pay for more expensive electronic devices or settle for lower tech products in the near future, the US alone will not be able to change the landscape of the global semiconductor supply chain. And for that, as long as Malaysian tech companies continue to innovate, we will have more customers to serve, not just from the well-known tech giants, but also the new startups and manufacturers in the US going forward. That's all we have for today. #FUCK.